starting the study on the reports 5 to 10 from the Auditor General of Canada that have been tabled today, October 21st, 2025.
All from the Office of the Auditor General. Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada. Nice to see you and your team here, whom I will introduce. Andrew Hayes, Deputy Auditor General. Jean Goulet, Principal. Gabrielle Lombardi, Principal. Nicholas Swales, Principal. Glenn Wheeler, Principal. Mathieu Lequet, Director. Welcome all. Thank you for coming in. This meeting is now in public. It is the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. We're going to try to have three rounds this morning. Each one approximately 20 to 25 minutes. The first consists of 3 members, 6 minutes each. Mr. Detel, I understand you'll lead us off and you'll be splitting your time. I will look for your signal for you to let me when you're splitting your time, or do you want me to interrupt you after 3 minutes? You'll let me know. Very good. 6 minutes, Mr. Detel.
6 minutes, Mr. Detel. Thank you very much. Chair.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Ms. Hogan, you should have interrupted me. You know this. You know these proceedings better than I do. I am sorry. I am sorry. There you go. We're so excited to get going. So, Ms. Hogan, I understand you have an opening statement for us.
I do have opening remarks. The member will have to wait a few minutes. Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to begin by recognizing that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I am grateful for the contributions and stewardship of Indigenous peoples across Canada who, for generations, have cared for the lands they call home. We are here to discuss the findings of 6 reports that my office released this morning. This release also includes a message to mark the halfway point in my 10-year mandate as Auditor General of Canada. Je vais me pencher en premier.
I will begin with our audit of the Canada Revenue Agency's contact centres and whether they provided Canadians with timely and accurate information about personnel taxes, about benefits, and also about business taxes. The Canada Revenue Agency has a duty to help individuals and businesses meet their tax obligations and to access benefits. I am concerned that in spite of a new call system and other improvements, Canadians are still waiting too long to get answers to their tax questions. During the last fiscal year, callers choosing to speak with an agent waited on average 31 minutes, more than twice as long as the agency's service standard of 15 minutes. When callers did reach an agent, they were often provided with inaccurate information.
Placed calls to contact centres and asked general or non-account specific questions. We found agents' responses to individual tax questions were accurate only 17% of the time, and business tax or benefit questions were accurate just over half of the time. To test the accuracy of agents' responses to account-specific questions, we reviewed a sample of recorded conversations. We found that the accuracy was much higher when questions pertained to specific accounts. Turning now to our 2 audits of programs related to the Canadian Armed Forces. The first focused on whether the forces recruited and trained enough members to meet operational requirements. Between 2022 and 2025, the Canadian Armed Forces fell short of their target by about 4,700 recruits. Though the forces were able to attract thousands of applicants, only 1 in 13 started basic training. Les forces ne savent pas toujours pourquoi.
The armed forces also did not have sufficient basic training. And without this information, that knowledge, the Canadian forces are not able to determine what needs to be done to increase the number of successful candidates. As I said, the armed forces also did not have sufficient basic training capacity to meet the demand if the recruitment targets had been met. The challenge attracting and training enough highly skilled recruits to staff many occupations, such as pilots and ammunition technicians, could affect the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force's ability to respond to threats, emergencies, or conflicts and accomplish their missions.
Canada's military forces focused on housing. Overall, we found that National Defence did not manage living accommodations to meet the operational requirements or respond to the needs of the Canadian Armed Forces members and their families. National Defence did not have enough living spaces at the right locations, including quarters that met its own standards for living space per person. We also found that some buildings were in poor condition, lacking basic amenities such as safe drinking water and working toilets. De plus, l'Agence de logement des forces canadiennes.
In addition, the Canadian Forces Housing Agency, which manages residential housing units on bases, did not plan to build enough new housing units to fill existing gaps. Canadian Armed Forces members can be required to move frequently. It is important for their morale and their well-being that they can access affordable housing in good condition with sufficient living space for themselves and their families. Our next audit examined whether the federal government had the tools in place to protect its IT networks and systems against cyber attacks. While the government did have a comprehensive strategy, there were gaps in some areas, such as cybersecurity defense services and response during active cyber attacks.
Organizations are not required to use the cybersecurity defenses offered by Shared Services Canada and Communications Security Establishment Canada. Though some have opted in, this inconsistent use of services has resulted in fragmented cybersecurity landscape that could undermine the federal government's ability to protect critical information and manage risks. We also found coordination among the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, the Communications Security Establishment Canada, and Shared Services Canada was too slow during active cyber attacks. Slow coordination and limited information sharing during a recent major attack delayed the government's response, extending the time during which the attacker had access to public servants' personal information. Malicious actions, external events, and attacks involving the Canadian government's digital systems are becoming more sophisticated and frequent. Une approche coordonnée
A coordinated and comprehensive approach to the government's cybersecurity posture, better collaboration, and a current inventory of IT assets are key to safeguarding Canadians' information and their trust in government, in IT systems. Let us now move on to the audit, which looked at whether Employment and Social Development Canada fulfilled its responsibilities to support early learning and childcare across Canada. The federal government committed $35 billion to provinces, territories, and Indigenous partners over 5 years to support the creation of affordable and accessible childcare spaces. As of March 2024, parents' out-of-pocket fees for these spaces had been reduced to about $16.50 per day.
Approximately 112,000 new childcare spaces as of March 2024. However, with less than 2 years left, there is a risk that the goal of creating 250,000 new spaces will not be met. Important progress has been made in bringing down childcare costs to parents. However, Employment and Social Development Canada needs to collect consistent and comparable data across the country to track the program's overall performance, inform future decisions, and support Canadian families. Dans notre dernier audit publié aujourd'hui,
in another audit published today, we did a follow-up that examined Indigenous and Canada's Services Canada progress to address 34 recommendations from 6 audits conducted since 2015. Programs to First Nations is a decades-long concern for my office. Despite its almost doubling Indigenous Services Canada's spending on programs over the last 5 years, we found unsatisfactory progress. More than half of recommendations to address long-standing issues critical to the health and well-being of First Nations communities. 20 years after my office first identified concerns with drinking water quality in First Nations communities, 35 long-term advisories remain in effect, including 9 that have been in place for a decade or longer.
Fewer emergency services agreements in place today than in 2022. These agreements are essential for timely coordinated responses to events such as wildfires and floods, while mitigating the disruption to people's lives and damage to critical infrastructure. Sustained focus from Indigenous Services Canada to rethink how it delivers programs while collaborating with First Nations to improve their capacity is an important step to resolving the persistent issues, improve outcomes, and advance reconciliation. As I look ahead to the second half of my mandate, my unwavering goal remains that my office will continue to provide nonpartisan, fact-based information to parliamentarians and the federal public service so that they can more easily adjust and best direct resources towards outcomes that serve the diverse needs of Canada's people. The intention is to be constructive and focused on the pursuit of excellence and accountability for the public service. This has been the focus of my first 5 years leading the Office of the Auditor General of Canada, and it will remain my focus for the next 5. Thank you. Merci.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for those opening remarks, and I apologize again for skipping over, particularly on your fifth anniversary. Congratulations are in order. I will now begin with Mr. Deltel, as I'd originally explained. 6 minutes, please. Merci beaucoup.
And I want to say this. Congratulations to you, colleagues. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to congratulate you on your mandate. The first 5 years have been important. We have no problem with some things as Canadians, but when Canadians are harassed by the CRA, it is a terrible situation, particularly when they don't have good information and they can't access that information at the call centre. What we are hearing is the level of mediocrity that exists at the CRA. Only 5% of the cases respected the service standards that had been established for the CRA. 4 times out of 5, the information that people got wasn't right. 17% of questions and information given about taxpayers was not the proper information that they needed. And therefore, the respect for the Canadian taxpayer has not been provided. They say that there is shift work that is being done, but I am not convinced. How have we gotten to this level of mediocrity? Well, that represents some 10% of what the workers are doing. To my mind, This is an agency that definitely would like to provide better service, and I understand the frustration of Canadians when they have a very long wait time to get answers. In a system where it is the responsibility of taxpayers to provide information on a timely basis to the CRA, people should be able to contact, if need be, the agents of the CRA, and they expect to get an exact answer and exact information during a reasonable time frame. And there is a great deal of improvement that can be made at the CRA. Well, yes, the telephone system has a value that's gone from $50 to $110 million. That's their telephone system that was supposed to be improved. And the people are still waiting far too long to get answers. Do you think that there can be an improvement to be made here? When you have 18% of people that have to wait 15 minutes or longer, the service standard that was established by the CRA, well, as to the management of the contract itself, it's not just a matter of the number of CRA officers that are there, but also the use of the tools that are available to officers to improve the situation. I saw so many red flags with this particular contract that I thought we should look more closely at the contract at the call centres that are managed by Shared Services Canada, but until 26. But there is a need for more exactness, reasonable time frames, and I think that that has to be looked at more clearly.
There are three things certain in life today: death, taxes, and you will wait on hold when you call the CRA. Another damning report that Canadians continue to pay more and get less. The average wait time is 31 minutes. The service standard is met only 18% of the time within 15 minutes, despite a 2017 effort of CRA's efforts to block calls. 8.6 million calls were deflected where individuals did not have an opportunity to speak to an agent. As far as accuracy is concerned, only 54% of the time accurate information was given, and 17% of the time relative to tax-specific questions. The priority for the CRA is breaks, in that it was shown that the CRA placed greater importance on how closely they adhered to their schedule for their shift and breaks than the accuracy and completeness of the calls that were provided. In one call recording, after 9 minutes, the agent remarked that the personal information authentication was taking too long for a 90-year-old caller who was having difficulty finding and recalling the correct answers. So why should Canadians tolerate this unacceptable service?
I think there's lots of opportunities within Canada Revenue Agency to improve how they provide service to Canadians, and having only about 10% of an agent's annual performance review based on the accuracy and completeness of their responses, in my mind, does not encourage a good culture where accuracy and completeness is top of mind. In Canada, our tax system is a voluntary one, and Canadians are expected to provide their tax returns on time with accurate information, and I think in return they should expect that the Canada Revenue Agency will be available in a timely fashion and provide them with accurate information. And what we're seeing is that is not the case, and this was meant to be a follow-up to see if things had improved since 2017. And I would say that if you're calling about a general question, they haven't gotten better. But if you are calling about specific things about your account, you will get an accurate answer. However, the My Account creation was meant to take calls away from a call center, and a majority of the calls received by the call center right now are trying to access My Account. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to make this more efficient for Canadian taxpayers.
Thank you.
A quick follow-up, or are you good?
Sure. The contract with IBM quadrupled from $50 million over 10 years to $190 million. When asked as well, neither Shared Services Canada nor the Canada Revenue Agency could confirm whether the invoice levels of activity, which were the basis for the charges invoiced to the agency, were accurate. So we're seeing the same type of practices not being followed that we saw in a Arrive scam. When will this government learn, and will Canadians ever get value for money?
Well, when we set out to do this audit, we were actually looking at the accuracy and timeliness of CRA's responses, but obviously we wanted to turn to whether or not the call center was providing good value for money. When we looked at the contract, which started at $50 million and is now estimated to be valued at $190 million, it does represent services for 3 departments. So the Canada Revenue Agency is about 30% of that value. But we found that invoices received very little scrutiny. And as you mentioned, that Shared Services and Canada Revenue Agency didn't verify the accuracy of what was being charged. So there were enough red flags here for me, and my inability to conclude on value for money is such that I will be starting an audit on the management of this contract so that it would inform the future contract for call center services that Shared Services Canada has just released.
I'm thrilled.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much, Ms. Guzzi. Up next is Mr. Osborne, please. You have the floor for about 6 minutes.
Thank you, and congratulations, Ms. Hogan, on your 5 years.
Thank you.
Look forward to your next 5. My first question is on the early learning and childcare system, and I do have an interest in this. When I was Minister of Education and Early Childhood Education in Newfoundland, we reached an agreement with the federal government. You raised a concern about whether or not the number of spaces can be created in the next 2 years. Just from personal experience, I know we had gone to $10 a day in Newfoundland and Labrador. That created not only the success of the program, but the challenge that it was more affordable and more people were signing up, creating a longer wait list. But we also increased exponentially the number of seats available in training institutions for early childhood educators. It's a 2-year program. You can't knit an early childhood educator overnight. So catching up with the number of educators required takes time. I know I checked back recently with the province. They've seen a huge increase of graduates, and that is expected to continue. Have you looked at that aspect when you raised concerns for the number of spaces that would be created over the next 2 years?
I mean, you're correct. There is a trade-off when you reduce the cost. The demand goes up, and then there's this ripple effect that impacts so many other areas of the industry. The difficult part with the way this program is run is that education, and in this case, early childhood education and care, is a provincial or territorial jurisdiction. So all I can look at is what the federal government money is being used for, and whether or not the federal government is receiving the information to show taxpayers that value for money was received. So when it comes to the additional spaces, a little less than half of the 250,000, which are the goal of this program, have been created, and there's just 2 years left to the 5-year horizon. So I do believe there is a risk that not all the spots will be created. But the federal government wasn't gathering information on whether or not new spots that were even created had been occupied by parents. And in fact, they had to turn to reports from Statistics Canada to find out whether or not parents were using those spots. And what they found is that in many cases, parents said that the spots were not in in their community, or it didn't meet their work schedule, or didn't have the support that their children needed if they had additional needs. So I think there's a real gap of information that the federal government needs to do better to work with the provinces and territories to get, so that Canada can really speak to the opportunities or the trade-offs of this program, and then talk about the successes or not.
Thank you. My next question is on, I guess, linking housing for our National Defence Canadian Armed Forces with recruitment. And lack of adequate housing may be a recruitment problem as well, if you're looking at them through the same lens. I know in Budget 2024 that I think it was $1.6 billion allocated for housing strategies for national defence. Have you seen any progress on that yet? Should that investment in national defence housing, that strategy that was announced in Budget 2024, address some of the concerns that you've raised?
I guess if I took a step back and talked about these two reports, I would tell you that national defence isn't recruiting enough members to meet its needs. In fact, only 1 in 13 make it to basic training, and there are thousands that apply every year. Is housing one of the concerns that they've raised? Occasionally, but I think the slowness of recruitment has many other issues. But housing is a concern that was raised on retention of existing members, and the National Defence isn't managing its housing portfolio in a way that's going to meet its needs, but also meet the needs of its members. The increased budget was meant to fund a 20-year plan to build housing units and renovate other housing units. So it's got a really long horizon. It would be impossible for me to tell you today if it would be enough. But what I could tell you is a lot of their plans and estimates are based on outdated information. And they should start by at least updating that information and then incorporating the desire to recruit more in order to see whether or not they have enough budget to deal with the housing issues.
Okay. And since your study, I know the government has announced a huge investment in our national defence, including increased wages, better benefits, and addressing some of the concerns that our service men and women have addressed. So that should help with recruitment. I know one of the recent meetings we had, the Lieutenant Governor, the Lieutenant General and the Deputy Minister had indicated they had new recruitment strategies in place as well. So that the increased budget, the recruitment strategies, do you see those addressing the concerns that you've raised in your report?
I think that obviously increasing the salary of our Canadian Armed Forces will improve recruitment, but also retention. And I do think that a recruitment strategy will help. But we identified other weaknesses that could help with recruitment. And I think one of the places to start is to understand why more than half of the people who apply sort of abandon the recruitment process and no longer have contact with the Canadian Armed Forces. Until you understand why individuals are leaving the recruitment process, you can't make changes that will help address. Our report does highlight some changes that were made during the audit, but again, too early to know the kind of impact that it will have on recruitment.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think there's probably not an MP in the legislature that hasn't received calls about the slowness at CRA. I know I spoke with the Secretary of State on that, and he had indicated there was a 100-day plan put in place. From your perspective, CRA's recent steps, such as increasing call capacity and expanding the digital services, can you talk about whether or not they address the gaps that were identified?
Mm-hmm. Those two elements that you raise, I think, are part of the concerns that we've seen, but there are others. I believe that many of the callers don't have the tools they need to actually respond to some of the questions that they receive. And we made some recommendations around improving those tools. I do think that having the evaluation of an agent more focused on the accuracy and completeness of their responses versus adherence to schedules would change the approach and indicate that the culture is one where the Canada Revenue Agency should provide accurate information. So there are many facets. I trust that the 100-day plan, as well as the responses to our recommendations, can only improve the situation for individuals trying to call the Canada Revenue Agency.
Thank you. That is the time, Mr. Osborne, and a little bit extra as well. Suivant, c'est Monsieur Lemire pour environ 6 minutes.
6 minutes.
6 minutes, Mr. Lemire. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Hogan, and all your team that have worked so hard. 5 years is a wonderful anniversary to celebrate. We hope in 5 years we'll be here to celebrate your 10th with you. But let me now turn to the very troubling aspects of your report with respect to the CRA, that employees are only able to give exact information in 83% of the instances. But if you are at your post on time and you have your break on time and you complete your shift, you're doing well. But if you're not providing good information to Canadians, that is having a major impact on Canadians and on Quebecers. Surely, if they could get 60%, which is the mark that they're given if they do all the things I've enumerated, surely they could get 60% by giving good information to Canadians. How do you explain the fact that since the last audit, things have not changed? Well, the situation has changed depending on the type of question you ask the CRA. If a caller has a general question about tax matters for a business or something else, 17% of the time the answer was correct for about half of the instances, but as rather 97% was correct for the instances. But when there was a more pointed question, like when can I get my benefits, when should I expect them, and so on. So it was very different beyond 80% of the time. So if you call for information that is truly tax-based or related to a tax matter, you will wait a long time, but you should have a good answer. So there is a margin of improvement there. Canada has two official languages. Did you assess the difference in the celerity with which the response was given in one language or another, or the attitude with which it was given? Yes, we did do some test calls for general questions, not related to their taxpayer account. In particular, we didn't see a difference with respect to French or English, neither with respect to the quickness of the answer that was given. Now, IBM Canada, this is the same firm that was involved in the modernization of Phoenix and its payout of benefits. So you're leaning on IBM systems once again. Do you think it would be time to look elsewhere to other firms rather than to a firm that continues to have problems? In Quebec, we launched an audit on SACLIC, and don't you think that there should be a commission of inquiry, perhaps, on what's going on in IBM? Well, I don't know what your definition is of a commission of inquiry, but I can say that when we looked at the management of the contract for this, there were a lot of red flags attached to it. The requests for authentication of invoices, bills, and so on. I'm going to be bringing in that report in 2026 to Parliament. Well, you mentioned that there was an instance of efficiency, but there were 2 good answers given to 6 questions. The others were not good in these robocalls. Do you think that this is a good thing? Well, artificial intelligence has been used by CRA. 2 out of 6 represents 30%, which is better than the general question response overall. But I would like to be able to see an improvement in all areas. Some people are very happy to use AI as a tool. Others are not. And so you have to improve that usage. A person of 87 or 97 who had difficulty expressing why they were calling the service that they needed. Do you envisage the possibility of having a senior citizens-based service at the CRA that would focus on this very vulnerable sector of our population? Well, this is not an assessment that we made. They do have a call center that is north-based on the far north, where you can have, where when you call, you can quite quickly reach an agent when you're calling from the north. But I don't know how you could do that. Perhaps for the persons who are older, there might be a multi-factor authenticity which could come into play, which would encourage them to be able to participate better. Thank you. Thank you.
Which will consist of members asking questions between 2.5 and 5 minutes. I'm going to turn now to Ms. Goodridge. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the team for being here, and congratulations, Ms. Hogan, on your 5-year anniversary. In your report on childcare, you say that the Liberals have fulfilled their responsibilities, and you quote that when it comes to flexibility, but there's no metric on flexibility. And in your report, you actually state that families outside of the standard hours are struggling to find care. So I'm just wondering how you can say that they are meeting their responsibilities.
So I said that the federal funding has led to improvements in early childhood and learning, but it is still time left, right, to decide whether or not all of the responsibilities have been met. The federal funding has helped reduce the cost of childcare. 5 provinces and 3 territories are already at $10 a day, which is ahead of the deadline of 2026. Additional spots have been created, but there's still a lot of work left to be done there. But then it was impossible for me to evaluate other areas, whether it came to accessibility or the quality of childcare. So while the funding's helped improve this situation, there's still room for improvement.
So do we have any idea how many kids are still without care?
Well, all I know is what the federal government received from the provinces and territories, and I can highlight what Statistics Canada would tell you that there in 2021 there was 2.2 million children who were aged 5 years and under, and more than half of them were in childcare, and that it was at an average cost of over $30 a day. So the fact that 112 spots have been created, which is less than half of the target, is why I raised the risk that filling the 250 spots or creating those 2 spots might be very difficult to achieve.
Do you know how many of the new spots are actually filled?
And that's actually a piece of information that the federal government isn't gathering from the provinces and territories. In fact, they turned to another Statistics Canada survey to understand why parents may not be taking up the new spots.
So part of why I asked this is Ontario Auditor General recently studied this, and they actually found that 27% of spots weren't being filled. That's very concerning to me. We're spending a lot of money. The Liberals keep boasting about how much money is being spent. We don't actually know how many kids are actually seeing the benefits of this.
So you actually raised something that I've been working on with some of my colleagues in the Provincial Auditors General Office. We felt that it was important to try and coordinate some of our work on topics exactly like this, where there's a lot of federal funding, but a lot of the heavy lifting happens in the provinces and territories. And so there will be two other provinces who will be looking at this as well. And I think it's important so that you can see the picture from the start to the finish, where the funding comes from and then how it actually happens.
Is there any standard information being collected across the provinces on this?
So there is some information being collected, but what the government did was they allowed every province and territory to provide it in whatever format they want.
Okay, cool.
There's flexibility in the agreements to make sure that they get consistent and standardized information, which is why we recommended that.
So I'm going to shift gears over onto the First Nations report. I found the information in that incredibly troubling. As the Member of Parliament for Fort McMurray-Cold Lake, wildfire is something that is very familiar to me. You stated that not all provinces have wildfire agreements. Which provinces have wildfire agreements?
So there are currently 5 provinces that have wildfire agreements. It's British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario. But I think what's important to note that it doesn't mean that every First Nations community in that province is signed on to that service agreement.
Okay, so then in my home province of Alberta, how many First Nations are without? That aren't covered
I don't
under that
have
agreement?
that specific level of information. I'm going to see if perhaps Glenn can add in something there.
In the province of Alberta, 25 of the 48 First Nations are not covered
So
by
half.
that agreement. So about half. Yes,
Half
correct.
aren't covered under the agreement, and you only have agreement, or the Government of Canada, the Liberals only have agreements with half of the provinces. How many territories are covered?
There are no territories that have agreements.
So this is an abject failure.
This is why we concluded that the progress on our recommendations from a 2022 report were unsatisfactory. There's a lot of work, and I think that Indigenous Services Canada really needs to rethink how they approach engaging and working with First Nations communities.
And they're trying to get to these tripartite agreements between the province, the nations, and the federal government. How many of those exist? It was announced in the 2019 budget.
So in 2022, we actually looked at agreements, and there was 6 emergency service agreements that had been put in place. None of them were tripartite. They were just moving to tripartite. They were sort of dual party agreements.
So 6 years post announcement in budget, and there's still 0.
Well, right now, what even more concerning is there's less service agreements, right, between 22 and now. And I think a service agreement provides the clarity to First Nations communities on what to expect in an emergency. And even if you're working towards something new, you could renew contracts that expire. You could put something in place to provide some clarity and certainty to First Nations communities.
Thank you. That is the time, I'm afraid, Ms. Goodridge. Up next is Ms. Yip for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations to you and your whole team on this 5-year milestone.
Yep.
I was just wondering very quickly, what do you feel is your most significant impact?
I have to admit, I don't think I was expecting that question today. I think that over the last 5 years, we've really changed within the organization and try to deliver reports that are easier to digest for people. Hopefully you actually want to read them. They're not 8 to 10,000 words. And we are covering topics that I think are so important to Canadians all across the country. We try to look at programs that cover masses, but then also to think about the population that needs it the most, those that are furthest behind, and hopefully encourage the government to bring them forward first. So I feel like I have a lot left to accomplish in the next 5 years, and I hope that Parliament will support me, and studying our reports is one of the best ways you can do that.
Great. So now I'm going to just dive right in. We've heard from our constituents across the country that Canadians don't just want faster phone service, they want easier ways to resolve issues without needing to call the CRA. How does the agency's shift towards digital services like extended chat hours and new account recovery tools align with your recommendations for long-term service improvements?
Well, I think that they are aligned, right? There are many individuals who want to speak with an agent, and then there are many individuals who are quite happy doing the self-service option. So there's an opportunity to improve Charlie, the chatbot. As we looked at, only 2 in 6 questions that we asked, which were general in nature, were accurate, when other publicly available artificial intelligence tools were giving better answers. So I think that our recommendation around improving tools, not just automated tools, but the tools that agents have, so that once you reach an agent, the call can be more efficient and effective. We found that on average, a call lasted about 17 minutes, but 20 to 30% of that time was spent on hold and waiting for someone to find an answer. So there's a lot of opportunities to just improve some of the tools, and that's leveraging technology to make things better. I think the final recommendation we made would be to divert or dedicate the calls that are about trying to access my account. So my account was a portal created so everyone could self-serve when it comes to the Canada Revenue Agency, but it's occupying the majority of the calls made to the call center. So if you could split those up, have some real technical support, but then expertise on answering tax questions, I think it would improve the service.
Okay, I'd like to turn to the cybersecurity report. Why is it that 119 out of 204 federal organizations are not required to use the cybersecurity services offered by Shared Services Canada?
I think it's important to say that there are some effective cyber defense tools out there, and the cyber defense sensors are one of them. It is a policy choice over which federal organizations are required to use the services offered by Shared Services Canada. Out of the 119 that are not required, some have voluntarily adopted some of the tools. They are known to be very effective. But when we ask them, why don't you use the tools? They cited a few reasons. One being a potential impact on their independence. For example, if they were a Crown corporation, using a tool offered by the government could impede their independence. That they felt there was the limited ability to customize these tools, but they were also concerned about the maintenance and support that might be offered from other organizations. Now, I can tell you that I'm one of the most independent offices in the federal government, and while I am responsible for ensuring that I have good cyber defenses, I have adopted the cyber defense sensors because it is a layer over and above what I have already put into place, and I think that Canadians would expect that the federal government will do everything they can to protect their information and the government's information.
Okay. Well, given that some of the Crown corporations may feel like they want to protect themselves, how does that impact on the coordination then?
Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the biggest gaps that we identified. While there are tools in place, there are some important gaps that exist in defenses. And when not everyone in the federal family is using all the same cyber defenses, you have a potential vulnerability or weakness. And in fact, the more people who contribute to feeding information about potential attacks just bolster the cyber defenses of the government of Canada. So I think something needs to be done to fix that fragmented approach.
Okay.
Thank you. Follow-up, Ms. Yip? If you don't, I can come back to one of your members later. So.
I can come back.
Okay, thank you. Your time was up, but if you had one, I was going to let you go ahead. Suivant encore, c'est M. Lemire pour 2 minutes.
Mr. Lemire, 2 minutes, 30 seconds, please. To the Auditor General, you know as a Quebecer that the best results are obtained when the various jurisdictions are respected. To look at the case of the child care centres, and Madame Marois comes to mind. If you create more spaces than the demographic analysis allows, 115,000, there is a transfer, unconditional, from the federal government. Does this represent some sort of interference in provincial jurisdiction? Well, it's difficult to look at the results of the situation in Quebec, the transfers to Quebec, because in other provinces the situation is different. Quebec actually had childcare services available on a daily basis. So it depends on how the information is going to be spread and used in the province to improve access to affordable daycare and childcare. And I think that there could be a recommendation where the government could use the modalities that exist in agreements that would be comparable throughout the country. A more type of global or universal approach, because what you want to do is spend money that will be value added for Canadians. We see that the federal bureaucracy has exploded in a variety of programs, CRA, for example. When you send monies to the provinces and territories, you want to be able to deliver the goods. So do you think more should be done to improve housing, for example, on First Nations, where you have flagged in your report that there were difficulties, not just to housing, but also the services that are offered to Indigenous peoples? So should there not be a support for First Nations that does not reflect a passive approach? How can you do this to make what you do for citizens more efficient? Well, I really haven't given thought about how that can be improved throughout the country. I looked at specific programs. But even if the federal money is given to a territory or a province, there has to be accountability for the federal government to be able to show to Canadian taxpayers that their money was well spent. And the level of government has to, the various levels of government have to reach agreement on that. So with respect to your issue, your question about First Nations, we have to first understand their reality. That is really necessary. The approach does not take into account their unique situation, and that has to change in the future. Thank you.
You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
I'd like to say congratulations on your first 5 years, Ms. Hogan, and hopefully your next 5 are as good as your first. I'd like to start on the recruiting for the Canadian military. So on Exhibit 2, we see that...
Okay, I hate to interrupt him, but I think we've pretty much covered what the reports are and what the issues are with those individual circumstances. Let's switch over to OGGO, because I think this is going to be quite juicy.
This most recent report, on bait and switch practices. I'd like to welcome back Mr. Yeglet, who I consider a great friend of OGGO. It's wonderful to have you back. And another Kelly. We can never have enough Kellys here, so welcome, Ms. Kilrea. The floor is yours for 5 minutes, sir. Again, welcome back.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. So thank you, Chair and members of the committee, for inviting me here today. As mentioned, my name is Alex Yeglich. I've been the Procurement Ombud for over 7 years, and I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you to provide an update on my office's activities, including a summary of our findings in our recently published bait and switch review. While I've appeared before this committee many times, There are new members around the table, so I'd like to take a moment to briefly introduce our office. Mon bureau est un organisme neutre et indépendant.
My office is a neutral and independent organization which was established in 2008 to help resolve contract disputes between Canadian businesses and the federal government,
Provide mediation services, and make recommendations to improve systemic procurement issues. Mon bureau est indépendant des autres organisations.
My office is at arm's length from other federal organizations, including Public Services and Procurement Canada. While I report to the Minister of Government Transformation, Public Works and Procurement, the Minister has no involvement in my office's daily activities or in the content of my reports.
The report was tabled 2 weeks ago, and every year it tells a strikingly similar story. The demand of our services keeps rising. In 24-25, we received a record number of 670 cases, almost double what we saw at the beginning of my mandate in 28-19. Yet our budget has not increased since the office was created 17 years ago. This growing gap puts the fulfillment of my legislative mandate at risk. My annual report also highlights systemic issues that persist year after year. Canadian businesses, procurement experts, and parliamentarians regularly raise issues of overly complex processes, unclear accountabilities, and fragmented rules. I also repeatedly identify these issues in my procurement practice reviews of federal departments. These issues prevent the system from working effectively and negatively impact Canadians' trust in government. As I told this committee last December, Band-Aid solutions are no longer acceptable, and what is needed now are foundational changes. To meet this challenge, my office has identified the top 5 foundational changes needed to improve the federal procurement system, in consultation with industry leaders, procurement experts, and key stakeholders within government. Our first recommendation is the creation of a Chief Procurement Officer at the federal level. Right now, procurement is fragmented across departments with no single point of accountability. Notre deuxième recommandation est la création d'un système.
Our second recommendation is the creation of a government-wide vendor performance management system.
Performance management program would address the fact that departments have no formal way of using suppliers' past performance, good or bad, to inform future contracting decisions. The third recommendation is the development of a single, universally applicable set of federal procurement rules. We wrote about this in early July, and I'm hearing enthusiasm for the idea, which gives me cause for optimism. The fourth required change is the use of artificial intelligence advancements to modernize federal procurement tools and systems. And the fifth is the establishment of a framework for procurement data collection to increase the transparency of federal procurements. All 5 of these areas are critical to improving the fairness, openness, and transparency of federal procurement, and the first one, a Chief Procurement Officer, could and should take the lead in implementing the other 4, and most importantly, be accountable. Just last week, my office published a report detailing the findings of our procurement practice review of replacement resources in federal professional services contracts, also known as bait and switch. This review stems from issues identified in previous reviews conducted by my office, as well as a request from this very committee to look into this further. The review revealed mixed outcomes. We found that in more than half of the files reviewed, the practice of replacing resources was done correctly and did not impact the government's selection of the best value supplier. However, in 41% of cases, replacement resources did not meet or exceed the qualifications of the original resource proposed to secure the bid, calling into question Canada's selection of the winning supplier and the fairness of the procurement process. We also noted how recent policy changes made by PSPC, such as focusing on corporate rather than individual work experience, have largely eliminated the use of bait-and-switch tactics. However, these changes could cause other unintended consequences for some suppliers, including making it harder for smaller-sized firms to demonstrate the experience required to obtain federal contracts. Before I close, I want to emphasize that as the Procurement Ombud, my office has a unique role. Unlike other departments involved in procurement, my office exists solely to focus on federal procurement, and we have a government-wide lens that allows us to see the full picture. We hear directly both from Canadian suppliers and federal buyers. This unique perspective gives us valuable insight into the challenges and opportunities that the procurement system faces. My office will continue to work with all federal procurement stakeholders to improve the system and ensure that it is open, fair, and transparent, and that it meets the evolving needs of Canadians. But we need a fair and reasonable budget to do this important work at such a critical time. In the coming months, my office will be publishing our procurement practice review of Indigenous procurement, and we will also continue to push for the implementation of our 5 foundational changes. We also hope to launch a new review on construction contract administration. This committee plays a critical role in promoting transparency and accountability, and I appreciate your continuing support of our office. Je vous remercie pour votre attention.
Thank you for listening.
Merci.
Much. We'll start with 6 minutes round with Mr. Patzer. Go ahead, please, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests for being here today. Really appreciate the work that you are doing. I noticed in your bait and switch report, and it's been getting a little bit of attention in the media as well, that government officials asked you to remove an entire section from the report. Who was it that asked you to remove that section?
So that's part of the formal process in the back and forth between ourselves and the department. So it was the department that asked for the removal formally in writing, and we included their full response in writing in the report, and we also included our full written response in writing.
Yes. So just kind of building off of that, so at the end of the day, why did you decide to keep that portion in your report and go against what the department asked?
So that's a great question, and the reason is because it's directly about the consequences of the change. So if you look at the report, it has essentially 2 effects. The first is through the first 3 LOEs, where we have a universe where bait and switch is in fact possible. Then you have the policy change that occurred as a result of a decision taken by the department. That scope period post-change is quite short, but as we were writing the report, we were also hearing from procurement stakeholders who were being impacted by that change, and we didn't think it would be appropriate to not mention those potential consequences and also add accountability to the department and include transparency associated with what we were hearing about that change in the report, because we saw it as directly relevant.
Yeah, thank you for that. I guess, why would somebody want that removed from the report? I mean, that just, like, to your point about accountability, right? Trying to remove an entire section of the report about the consequences just strikes me as odd. Why would someone want that removed?
Again, I think I don't want to put myself in the shoes of the department, but based on the language that was used in their response, they believed that it was speculative and out of scope for the review, right? In the sense that the files that we looked at wouldn't have dealt with those unintended consequences. So in the report itself, it includes a response on a request for information, and we also included the response from the department, which identifies a concern from a small or medium-sized business about what the consequence will mean for their ability to secure future contracts. And then simultaneously, we were hearing through other channels from small and medium businesses about these same impacts. And so rather than mute those voices, we thought it was incredibly important to have them represented in the report. And the department disagreed because they felt like it was too speculative to be included.
Yeah. Talking about the bait and switch issue here, 41% saw unqualified, or I guess you kind of talked about in your opening remarks there. That's a pretty large amount of projects that were impacted by this. I guess maybe can you just spell out really quickly, I guess, for the listeners, what impact that 41% would have on projects, and I guess what concerns do you have about that going forward if it's unaddressed?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. What I'll do is I'll first address the impact on the procurement process. So in that 41%, the actual attributes of the resource were a big part of the decision-making process as to who would ultimately deliver on that project. So the quality of the resource was defined by the government as being important. So when that resource is replaced, it's incredibly important that that important resource reflect those same attributes. And what we were suggesting is in 41% of those instances, that resource didn't reflect those same attributes. right? And so what that does mean is it means that a lower standard in many of these instances of resource was provided, and perhaps at a higher price point. And then from a procurement standpoint, it could have potentially altered the sequencing in who ultimately would have been the successful supplier.
Is there specific departments that this practice is more widespread in than others?
So of the 7, I can say that 3 were through GAC and 3 were through Shared Services. So GAC is Global Affairs Canada, and Shared Services Canada were the 2 highest departments.
Okay. And I guess, for the listeners who are watching this, how concerning is that?
So I have to go back to a previous answer which speaks to the universe before and after the change. So if a change hadn't been made and these practices continued, I would be very concerned, and the tone that I would be striking would be very different. As opposed to talking about unintended consequences, we could be still talking about the practice of bait and switch if left unaddressed. So to pay the appropriate amount of respect to what the department did do, it did seek to address the bait and switch issue. So I don't mean to half answer your question, but I'm not as concerned given the change has already taken place. Where my concern lies is now in the unintended consequences of that change.
Okay, thank you. I think I only got about 20 seconds left, so I'll maybe just wrap it up there.
Thanks very much. Mr. Gasparo, please.
Thank you.
I'm going to grab a cup of Joe.
Great to see you again. As I say to a lot of the public servants who come in here, thank you both for your public service and dedicating your career to helping our country. So just to be clear, you believe that the use of subcontractors more broadly is a standard practice, and that's something that will continue.
So I just want to clarify the question, subcontractor or resources, because the bait and switch isn't necessarily about subcontractors,
Sure.
It's about the resources. So is this a common practice? Absolutely. This why there are methods of supply specifically geared towards this type of activity.
Right. So it's a common practice, and it's something that will continue, and that we will continue to have some flexibility built into the system. I'm assuming that, what I don't want to see happen, and I know you're not suggesting this, is that sub-resources stop being, there's a freeze on the use of sub-resources. And I don't think you're not suggesting that, but that's a practice that will continue more broadly.
Right. And just to clarify, what we also say in the report is many of the contractual tools necessary to mitigate bait and switch already existed in the previous universe. And so it would just be more successful implementation of those tools to have addressed the issue. And that's also what we speak to in the unintended consequences section is, we could have perhaps resolved this differently. But again, paying respect to the pressure that the department was under, we're talking at the height of the ArriveCAN reviews. And so the department was under pressure to react. And so this reaction resulted in a removal of the possibility of bait and switch in most circumstances.
Great. Thank you. Moving on to another topic, you mentioned AI. And how can the government of Canada utilize AI to modernize our procurement process and help guide you and your office in improving efficiency?
Absolutely. So it's a great question. So within our office, we are trialing all different facets in which we can use AI ourselves, meaning even vetting the recommendations that we make based on the information available when it's publicly available to assure ourselves that we're looking at the right things and essentially help us create rough drafts of documents that are overseen by humans. In the larger procurement span, there are certainly things that can be done, particularly on repetitive practices. So like tools like statements of work that are somewhat generic in nature. Can an AI tool be used to generate a statement of work and make modifications with human oversight? And I think the answers are yes, the tools currently exist to do that. I wouldn't suggest there shouldn't be human oversight which is able to identify errors made using the tools, but at this stage I think there are certainly implications for AI. Now moving forward, I think there's even more hope in terms of if the AI is incorporated into all facets of procurement, it could even identify, likelihood of success for suppliers bidding on certain prices, scanning the total environment of that acquisition over the last several years. And that data would be incredibly useful from an efficiency standpoint if you were a supplier trying to figure out if it's a worthwhile exercise to spend your time and effort bidding on a process where your win percentage is 1%, as an example.
Thank you for that. In my past life, which depending on the day I now refer to as the good old days, I served on the board of directors of Post Media, which made a little bit of news for a Liberal to join that board, but that's another conversation as well. And we talked about utilization of AI, and one of the concerns we had then, and we had to manage a little bit, were the safeguards around AI and copyright and a whole bunch of other things that were pertinent to the media industry. But in our case, obviously there has to be some safeguards in place. Can you talk a little bit about that and the responsible nature of the integration of AI into your office?
So what I can say is that this is a continually evolving space. And so what I say today may be obsolete in a matter of weeks or months. But that being said, so long as the information is publicly available and not protected in any manner, then we feel like that is appropriate to use to perform AI analysis. And so what I mentioned before is we did vet, some of the recommendations we've made in previous reports through an AI model to determine whether, in fact, we were providing accurate recommendations based on the model. And so in the limited sample size that we used, it did, in fact, confirm that the recommendations made were analogous with the recommendations made by the AI tool. So that demonstrates, I don't want to say that, I don't want to say anything overtly positive about either ourselves or the office, but we were consistent.
Thanks for that. Is that my time? All right, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Gasparo. Well, actually, we'll get back to you for more time if Mr. Yeglett is not replaced by AI in the next hour or so. We'll go to Ms. Gaudreau, please, for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. What we're discussing today is new for me, and I'm asking myself questions in 2025 with all the recommendations that you've received. You have relevant experience for 7 years. So I wonder, can we guarantee to Quebecers and Canadians that when a contract is signed, the government is getting value for its money? Or are you going to tell us that it's impossible to guarantee that today? I would like to hear what you have to say about that.
Peut-être pas de garantir.
No guarantee. I can respond with my frustrations. I said I've been working in this domain for 7 years. I made many recommendations. There are some areas in the procurement process where we have lots of responsibilities to provide more training, provide more clarity, more simplification. I think simplification is the most important of all the recommendations because it must be accessible to everyone in Canada. So if you are a small-sized supplier, you must have the same opportunities to be awarded a federal contract. A vendor, as a vendor in a big organization. I don't know if I answered your question well. Absolutely. Mr. Chair, this summer, I met with extremely competent people to come and help interpreters, and we realized that in Quebec, the cost of interpretation makes it difficult for them to penetrate and come and work here to offer services in French and English. But I know that concerns the Official Languages Committee. But this worries me. This leads me now to the next question. We will be receiving the minister on Thursday. I would like you to tell us, do you think that the agency could help us deal with some of your concerns?
J'espère que oui.
I hope so. I think that is why it's very important for us to be transparent with our recommendations. I've been trying to talk to people in Parliament, to the minister himself, expressing the importance not only of vendors, but also those who purchase, who are responsible for acquisitions or procurements. They have the same concerns. I don't want to repeat myself by insisting on simplification, but I think if we do not do that, we will lose a lot of our vendors, not only in the area of translation, but this affects a lot of people. What I understand is that we are expecting, when the minister comes, to reassure you about transparency, but also reassure you that we have the necessary staff or personnel to avoid a problem with. It's a phenomenon I did not experience with Mackenzie and Arrive Can, but there are lots of things we need to do to prevent such situations. I have many questions. Federal expenditure for defense. Let's talk about contracts. I am seriously concerned. An agency that is established, could it have everything it requires to control procurement? Let me please answer in English.
As I'm sure we're all aware, a new agency was created with a specific focus on defense procurement. So currently, we've assessed that that new agency will form part of our mandate. So those procurements will be subject to review from the office. What I think is an overt positive is it's a recognition that things need to be done differently. So we've spoken about the need for foundational changes. I think the recognition of creating a separate agency for defense procurement recognizes that the old ways of doing things were not working effectively. And we would echo that sentiment. But what I don't want is for the rest of the procurement universe to be left behind, because while we focus on defense procurement as a priority, the procurement universe will still exist. And so my hope is that many of the changes being thought about in defense procurement will equally be thought through as a whole environment to ensure that the positive changes reflect all of that. And the last thing I'll say, if I may, is the 5 foundational changes we're putting forward should equally impact the defense environment as well, because as you see, they're called foundational for a reason, right? They're not nuanced, they're not specific to a sector, and I'll leave it there.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thanks very much. We'll go to our 5-minute and then 2.5-minute round. Colleagues, if it's fine with everyone, we do have a fair amount of time available to us today. So if you can just get your question in by your mark, or if Mr. Yeglet's answering a question, we'll allow him to continue on past our regular 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 2.5 minutes. Go ahead, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yeglet, for your report. But I have to say, the fact that we're talking about bait and switch in government contracts today is, to me, it's outrageous, and it should be for all Canadians. Canadians expect that when their government signs a multi-million-dollar contract, that the people hired to do the job are the ones who were promised. But your report shows that in many cases, companies win a contract by proposing top-tier experts and then quietly replace them with less qualified staff once the ink is dry. You describe this as bait and switch tactic and potentially violating procurement rules and possibly crossing the line into fraud. Can you explain what you mean by bait and switch in federal contracting?
So I don't want to be too nuanced, but I've described it somewhat as bait and switch light and then bait and switch, which includes the fraud element. So the fraud element includes intentionality on the part of the supplier. And so just to clarify, our mandate is to review the practices of federal departments. And so it's difficult for us to assess the intentionality of the supplier. And so it would have to be putting forward resources with the intention to never having them perform any of the work. And that's what gives rise to the fraud. What we've identified in the report, in the 41% that you rightfully identify, is there's still a risk to the procurement of that specific contract. And how this plays out is that in the selection criteria, typically the methodology in many of these contracts is either balanced on an 80-20 or 70-30 split, with the technical being the 80 and the financial being the 20, meaning if you're evaluating resources, that ultimately is and can be the tipping point for the decision as to which supplier is successful. And so here in the examples that we've highlighted, it's where you have decided that the resource and their skill set matters. You've chosen to evaluate them. You do evaluate them. You base your selection based on that evaluation. And then in the actual performance of the contract, there's a replacement of that resource. And so that's the component that we identify as problematic.
What does that say about the integrity of our system when companies can profit off taxpayers by offering one thing and delivering something completely other?
And so, to be fair, as we mentioned in the report, there are a number of reasons why replacement might take place. And so we want to make sure that that's also clear to the viewers and to the members of the committee, is that there's a multitude of factors that could result in the replacement of resources, one of which is timing. So what we put in the report is just to give you an indicia of how long it sometimes takes to go from the bid close period to contract award to the actual tasking. Now, the counterpoint to that is everyone involved in the system understands that. So you're still attesting to the fact that you're going to provide these resources, knowing that there's going to be delays throughout the process. So it can't be an argument to say delays unto themselves are a surprise, because that's normal. So what I will suggest is that we've essentially agreed that this is a highly problematic practice, that the tools existed at the time to better enforce and prevent the instance of bait and switch. However, the department has opted to go in the path that they have, which is to promote the use of corporate criteria as the new determining factor. So it takes away the emphasis on the individual resources and places the emphasis on the corporate entity and the experiences of the corporate entity.
So what your report shows is pretty simple. Companies are winning government contracts by promising top-notch experts, then swapping them out for people who don't have the same skills once the deal is signed. And instead of using the tools that they already have to stop it, the government's main contracting department decides to stop checking the qualifications of the people doing the work at all. So help Canadians understand this. Why would a department decide it's easier to change the rules than to enforce them? Like, what does that say to taxpayers who just want to know that when they pay for quality, they actually get it?
Right. Thank you for the question, Chair. So again, I obviously am not a spokesperson for the department, nor should I be. But based on the information provided to us as part of the review, the changes made also align with a broader change towards a solutions-based environment, meaning that the contracts that we looked at were task-based. And internally, I've used kind of the example to demonstrate the difference, and I was just waiting for the opportunity to tell it, so if I'm allowed, I will. But the difference between a task-based and a solutions-based opportunity would be, in layman's speak, I need my lawn cut on Tuesdays, and I will pay you on a weekly basis, would be be an example of a task. In a solutions-based environment, I tell you that I'm an individual who travels a lot, who wants a nicely maintained lawn, but isn't around to figure out how to have that done. And the solution offered would be to provide a solution to my problem, as opposed to the tasking. So hopefully that centralizes the difference between a task and a solutions-based. So the government is moving towards more of a solutions-based environment where there's more emphasis on creativity on the part of suppliers. So again, I'm not a spokesperson for the department, so that's essentially the decision that was taken. I will say that there were subsequent changes made effective in July of this year, also around professional services, that include things like a cap for the total value of professional services that can be contracted. And I'll leave it there.
Rochford, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I found the report to be very thorough, very well done, very informative. I thought, actually, I don't know if it's okay to say that, but I enjoyed reading it. And overall, I found that it was good to learn that the Public Services and Procurement Canada, I guess, has done a good job, is how I interpreted the findings of implementing several process changes and improvements to address procurement deficiencies that you've identified or have been identified in previous audits. I particularly noted the findings that changes to professional services contracts have significantly reduced the risk of suppliers engaging in, I guess, what would be referred to as deceptive tactics, such as bait and switch. I had a problem with that term because overall, when I read the report and all of the incidents, I didn't find them deceptive in any way in nature. And I find to some extent, like the line of questioning that we just had, suggests a the files that were examined, that they're not being, they're being I have a hard time. Characterization. Thank you for helping me with that term. And so it suggests a deceptive tactic, which I did not find in your report. So to some extent, I question the title of the report, bait and switch, but that's not my question, actually. But so I found, like Mr. Patzer, I was very intrigued by the segment of your report on unintended consequences and possible solutions. And I also found, which I guess was related to this, to your comments related to small and medium-sized businesses. And I did note, too, on page 33 that the response from PSPC was that they did not feel that this formed part of the report. And you indicated that you wanted to, and you've responded. I was going to ask you why, but you've responded to the question. But I wondered if, and for me, that's very important as well, the ability for small and medium-sized businesses, as Madame Gaudreau has just highlighted. And I suspect for all of us, that's important for us to know that small and medium-sized businesses can participate in the purchasing procurement process of the government. But I was just wondering if you are aware, and I'm sure you are, and why maybe it wasn't more highly noted, the fact that PSPC will be launching in the spring a new small and medium-sized business procurement program.
Thank you for the question. I think Kelly will agree with you in terms of the title of the report because that was actively discussed within the office.
Thank you. Please make good comments, eh? Thank you for that.
In essence, I did want to be able to respond to one part of your first comment, which was about good practices seen in the report as well. And what I will say was a true marked difference between what we saw in ArriveCan in this report was the state of documentation. So there was a lot of inferences that had to be drawn when we were doing reviews specifically in ArriveCan because the documentation was not at the quality that was expected. And so as a result of many highlighted issues and concerns, including recommendations from our office, the documentation in almost all of the files was excellent. And that might not seem like a significant takeaway, but it really is from an accountability and transparency standpoint. So I don't want that to be lost from the report, that was certainly a good practice. Now, in terms of what the departments themselves did in relation to some of the recommendations, that also was highlighted in the report. There were, in fact, good practices associated with the work of the departments. We highlighted an example of PSPC and ESDC working in tandem to ensure that at contract award that there was a confirmation of the resources and their availability, which we identified as a good practice. And then further, we noted a good practice where the replacement of resources was substandard. And so it was the department that took proactive measures to ensure that those resources were replaced with effectively better resources than those that were being provided. And we did want to highlight those because we think those are great examples. That being said, I think it's really important to take a balanced view. Now, in terms of the unintended consequences piece, we are acutely aware of the potential impacts of those unintended consequences to small and medium businesses. And as I did mention, they have been contacting us in other ways, identifying concerns that are aligned with what you would have seen in the RFI response in the report. And because we saw a consistent concern from small and medium-sized businesses, we thought for accountability and transparency purposes, it was important to include that. And to be honest, the fact that this committee is highlighting it means it will be top of mind for the department as well, right? And so we could have highlighted this by way of a separate letter to the department, but it wouldn't have had the same impact. So I honestly think the impact that we were hoping for has been achieved.
That's my whole 5 minutes right there. And that was an excellent response. Thank you. I like the balanced approach in comments. I think that words are so important. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Ms. Goudreau, please, for 2.5-ish.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you.
Avec l'agence.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to come back to the agency at Defense. Your mandate and experience over the past 7 years is very important. Will this apply as well with this new structure? Yes, but it's going to be different. We cannot consider bait and switch because it's not going to be that yet. We are going to try to find out if unintended consequences will materialize. If not, everything will be okay. But there has to be transparency regarding those recommendations. Otherwise, well, it's important to understand that after 2 years, we will go back to all departments and see what results were obtained following our recommendations. So it's not simply finalizing the report and saying goodbye. We will go back to all the departments, request more documents, and find out whether the recommendations were well implemented or find out if there were any problems. We will do a follow-up review. When we do a follow-up review, we submit a report card in our annual document, which is submitted to Parliament. I have a question. I'm thinking of taxpayers who are wondering what is happening to their money. How is it possible to demonstrate accountability, transparency, proper management of public funds? When I look at the report, I highlighted some points. 6 of the 17 files had no resources proposed and did not carry out the work that was set out in the project. In 16 of the 17 files, there was no proof that the supplier participated in the preparation of needs. But initially, you said you didn't have staff and money. First of all, we want to do our job well, but I'm thinking about the very important files. How can we succeed if we want to make sure that transparency and accountability are real values? I will answer in English.
La budget.
Concerning the budget of our office, I am very frustrated. It's been 4 years now that I have been trying to have more money for the necessary reviews to provide greater reassurance when it comes to procurement?
I must admit, I am speaking in a place of frustration when it comes to our budget. I find it incredibly important as a public servant to be a prudent fiscally responsible steward of taxpayer dollars. And I can assure you, while I've been with the organization, that has been a driving mandate. Nonetheless, I think we also understand that the expenditure of $37 billion per annum requires a significant review function. And we have a number of works in the queue that cannot be pursued because we do not have the resources. And I have tried, and I have tried and tried using different methodologies, writing to all members of Parliament, meeting with ministers, meeting with deputies, and everyone, understands the need for the money, but nonetheless, I've never been successful. So I hope my next job isn't as a fundraiser, because I can tell you I've been ineffective at raising the funds, but that doesn't change the fact that our office desperately needs these additional funds to do the reviews that are absolutely essential. The second part of your question speaks to kind of the taxpayers' trust in the system and being able to read the outcomes of this report and be confident that the Canadian government is spending taxpayer dollars effectively. And I think, again, a balanced answer is appropriate, because I think the report identifies two worlds. One, where bait and switch was possible, controls existed, and they weren't fully leveraged. And so we should ask ourselves why they weren't fully leveraged. And then we have the transition point. In a decision was taken that we were no longer looking at the basis of evaluation to be based on resources. We're now looking at the corporate entity, right? So that does address the problem, but it changes it, right? So we're no longer saying what was valuable to us before is valuable to us moving forward, because let's not kid ourselves. We can call them solutions, but they're still being delivered by resources, right? And so there is that component of this analysis also that I think requires some contemplation. But that being said, it's important to have safeguards such as our office being involved in the process, because I can tell you our involvement is to make the system better. My involvement isn't to create a scandal. I want the system to work better for future participants in the procurement process.
Juste, Monsieur le Président, je sais que mon temps a dépassé.
Chair, I know that I don't have enough time. I just want to make sure with interpretation services, you said 4 years. You've been fighting for 4 years. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks very much. Mr. Gill, please, and then Ms. Suds.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, folks, for being here. Quick question following up on what Mr. Patzer was talking about regarding the bait and switch on the report in the Globe and Mail, I think it was. Have you been asked to remove sections of your reports in the past?
The structure of the back and forth between the department is actually contemplated as part of the Procurement Ombudsman regulations. And so there is an aspect of us providing the department the recommendations and the reasons therefore to the department for 30 days for their comment. And so it's not unusual for departments to come back and make suggested revisions. So what I would suggest is that oftentimes those revisions are made outside of the formal response of the department. In this instance, the department chose to include it as part of their formal response. And so what you see is verbatim a transcript of their response to the draft report in the organizational response section. So your question was, is that unusual? It's not unusual to request changes. I would say it's not common for a full redaction of sections of the report. I would say that's less common.
This has never happened before?
No, I wouldn't say never happened before, because that's a standard where I'm sure if I went back to the office, I would find that it has happened before, but I would say it's not common.
Did they provide you any substantive evidence to support their claim that these paragraphs were speculative and outside your scope?
No, so what was reflected in the report is the rationale provided for the removal. And so we believe, as I've mentioned in a few answers, that the information contained in the RFI that is included makes it directly relevant. And then that's compounded by the fact that other small and medium-sized businesses were contacting our office while the review was ongoing, indicating similar concerns. And so as an Ombud office, we felt it particularly relevant to include. And for the reasons of accountability, for the reasons of transparency, we included it in the report.
So in other words, you actually had evidence to support your findings.
So we have evidence to demonstrate that the potential for these unintended consequences exists.
Obviously you said this request was made formally, and by whom?
So it would come from the departmental contact. And so we would write to the deputy to launch the review. However, we also ask for a departmental contact to kind of be the main spokesperson for the department throughout the process.
This is included in the report as to the back and forth you had, the email chain?
So the actual email chain is not. There's a formal component to it's a section entitled departmental response. And so the departmental response that was provided by the department is what you see reflected in the report. If there is an email chain that is in addition to the formal response, we can absolutely provide that to the committee.
Perfect.
Just interrupt there. We do have a policy in the committee that anything promises within 21 or 21 days. Thanks very much.
Did your office consider escalating this matter to Parliament or another oversight body when this request came in? As in, did you find it troubling or not so much?
So what we did find is that we wanted to be transparent in what is what's happening. And so we reflected their response back, and we reflected that our decision was to include that section of the report, which I believe kind of speaks to what you're asking about, which is the transparency component. And so their language is included in the report, our response to include the language in the report. I think had we not included the language in the report, you wouldn't have even been aware that there had been this dialogue. And so, again, I think the issue that is so important is that this consequence to small and medium-sized businesses be tracked, right? And that's what we're asking for, and to bring as much spotlight to this issue as possible. So I think in that sense, it's been effective in doing that.
Given that 76% of ArriveCan-related contracts involve personnel who had never performed the work, do you believe this reflects negligence, willful disregard, or lack of capacity within PSPC to enforce compliance? Because earlier you mentioned that the controls were not leveraged. Why not?
So it's a fair question. So in ArriveCan, just to clarify, that 76%, they were looking at slightly different things. So when we did the ArriveCan review, we weren't looking for bait and switch. What we identified in ArriveCan was that in 76% of the instances, some or all of the resources proposed did not perform work under the contract. And to us, that was a shockingly high number. But we didn't have metrics underneath that overall percentage to be able to identify were these legitimate replacements. But even if you accept the fact that they're legitimate replacements, then something is not working in the system where the designed process results in a 76% replacement rate. But that was, in fact, the genesis of the report that you see before you today. In the report you see before you today, we were able to unpackage or lift the hood on what is actually happening. And there are a number of reasons why resources might be replaced, some of which are legitimate and some of which are unknown or illegitimate, right? And the illegitimate is when you start to look at, and again, not to repeat myself, but there's two variants to this. There's what I would describe as bait and switch light, which doesn't include intent, and then bait and switch with intent, which equals fraud. We did not see the bait and switch with intent, which equals fraud, but what we did see is the bait and switch that could impact the ultimate successful supplier in the procurement process.
That is our time,
okay,
or past our time. Ms. Sutz, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for being here and for the report. Maybe just one quick question before I move on to what I intended to ask. Based on this last line of questioning, is it, from your experience, improper or unethical for departments to suggest or ask for revisions in reviewing your work?
So I do think because it forms part of the Procurement Ombudsman regulations to actually provide departments the opportunity to comment, I don't think there's anything inappropriate about the opportunity to comment. The requested removal of the report, was a request made by the department that we thought important to transparently show in the report, and we reacted by kind of our further justifications, which were we believed that it was supported not only with the text in the report, but also information that we gleaned during that same period while the report was being written. So is there anything inappropriate about the department coming back and making a request? No.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that clarification. So I'm curious, I would like to go back to some of the recommendations previously made to the government and ask specifically of your assessment of the work that's happened since those recommendations were made.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Chair. This question speaks to many of our procurement practice reviews that we've done. So what I will say without elaborating too much is we did 17 departmental deep dives where we looked at the highest spending, value and volume departments in federal procurement and did an individualized assessment. And so we did do follow-ups with almost all of those, or many of which are in train now. So you'll see all of that reflected in our annual report, and there are report cards. So to directly answer your question, what are we seeing? We're actually seeing implementation of the recommendations. And one positive, and I would describe this as a huge positive for us, is we also track the top 10 issues year after year. And one of the things that I used to really be upset about is year after year, those same issues reflected themselves almost verbatim. And so it meant that we weren't making the course corrections necessary to address those long-standing static issues. And one of them was overly restrictive criteria, and that was typically number one. And so through these 17 reviews, we made sustained efforts to make recommendations associated with removing overly restrictive criteria. And this year is the first time that restrictive criteria fell out of the top 3, so it's number 5. So it's not as if it doesn't still exist as a problem, but that's a significant,
Sorry, that was the
I don't want to say win,
in the background.
But it really is, in the sense that it demonstrates that sustained commitment in recommendations can have a positive effect. And again, I'm not foolish enough to believe we alone had that outcome, but we certainly played a part in highlighting this issue and making it highly relevant for all departmental actors to be acutely aware of not creating opportunities that were overly restrictive and limited participation.
Excellent, thank you. And obviously great to see the ongoing progress. I wanted to ask, maybe using a specific example that was in the report, and that was around the changes PSPC made to the master level user agreement. Can you explain to us what this change means and what the impact of that is? So the biggest change, and Kelly can jump in and correct anything I'm saying, but the biggest change was where it was large task-based contracts with multiple resources could no longer assess the individual characteristics of the resource, but would now evaluate the corporate entity and the past experiences and past performance of that corporate entity. And that's probably the most significant change. And so you'll see part of the report in this section actually speaks to definitions, right? So when you use the term large, what does large equate to? And so we were probing each department that was subjected to the review to say, how have you interpreted large? And have you mitigated the concern? And so what we saw is in 3 of the 5 instances, we found appropriate mitigation measures and that would align themselves with this shift. And 2, we're still kind of working through this definition of large. And you'll notice one of the recommendations we made is for PSPC to actually define this term and to provide for standardization. Because if I may get on the pulpit for one more second, standardization is also something that is sorely lacking in procurement. And there's two schools of thought about individualization versus standardization, but I can tell you that suppliers often don't just sell to one singular department. They sell to multiple departments, they sell to multiple jurisdictions. So the more standardized the process, the more cost-effective the whole process is, meaning they don't have to spend inordinate amounts of time preparing their proposal because certain terminology is static, so they know what to expect. When they have to hire a proposal writer, where they have to hire a legal advisor, in order to facilitate responding to a federal opportunity, that immediately limits the pool of available suppliers that are likely to participate in that process.
Thanks again. I just wanted to kind of build, I guess, off of that even a little bit. Recommendation 2, which had you wanting them to write in that the replacement resources, qualifications, and experience that meet or exceed those obtained from the originally proposed resource. PSPC disagrees with you on that. Just wondering why would they disagree with you on that? That seems like one of the best ways to prevent bait and switch from happening would be to require them to match the qualification that they originally bid for.
And for this one, I think there is a relatively straightforward answer. So what they were pushing back against is when we originally had drafted this recommendation, it was the location where this change should be implemented, and we wanted it done at the master level, so at the master level user agreement level. And what they pushed back on is saying it's inappropriate to include within the master level user agreement itself, but it should be as a part of all of the templates that are part of that master level user agreement. So they didn't disagree with the substance, it was just in terms of the structure and design. And so we ultimately agreed with them that it was better positioned to be as part of a template and not part of the user agreement itself.
Within your mandate, do you actually have the ability to definitively and concretely say that something is fraud if you were to find an instance of fraud?
No, because again, that has criminal implications. So if we were to see fraud, what we would do is we would alert the RCMP, and then they would ultimately take over whatever investigation was necessary to make that determination.
Okay, yeah, so say, yeah, okay. You've pointed out the possibility of fraud, but how are we supposed to take the next steps to fully investigating it? I mean, I know you just said that you referred to the RCMP, but are there more measures that your office could be taking to kind of, I guess, advance the ball further down the field, per se?
Right. So I think if we had seen instances, so there is an opportunity for departments to request confirmation that the resources themselves have certified their availability. And if we had seen instances where the department had asked for that certification, but none were provided, I think that would have raised the red flag for us. And so that would have been a circumstance where it would have caused concerns in line with the fraud that you're indicating.
And if I may, I just wanted to mention as well that the new master level user arrangement has also now incorporated that term that all resources proposed in large task outside of large task authorization based contracts must provide a digitally signed proof of consent with their bid. So that should also help mitigate that issue.
Okay, how close have you come to identifying fraud in this? I mean, obviously, if we had 41% that didn't meet requirements, I mean, that obviously gives you a pretty big amount of substance to be able to look at. Surely to goodness, some of these were close to being cases of fraud. I mean, if it's that rampant, obviously, you know, I don't want to directly imply intent here, but I mean, if there's that many of them, obviously there's a systemic issue that does exist. Would you not agree with that?
So what I would suggest is these aren't the same supplier in each circumstance, right? So each one of these is a unique supplier. So this isn't 41% of instances where it's the same supplier doing the same things, right? And also we're looking at different departments. So I believe you previously asked which departments were implicated, and there were some that were implicated more than others. But in terms of what considerations we're looking for, things like timing. When were the resources replaced? Were they replaced immediately? Was it a replacement of one or all of the resources? Were reasons provided? So were reasons requested and not provided? Were reasons required and not provided? So each one of those would provide indicia. Plus the factor that I identified, which is if the department asked for, so the supplier themselves attest to the fact that the resources provided are available. Did the department go back and ask for proof of those attestations? And that's something we didn't find. So like I said, that would have been the red flag. The other factors I identified are what you are kind of, I think, probing on, or what indicia would we be looking for to kind of walk us down that path?
Yeah, exactly. It feels like, really quick, feels like there's a loophole that might be in existence here. Is there a loophole that exists, and if there is, can it be closed?
So I'm not sure I fully understand in terms of the reference to the loophole, but what I would say is, we're certainly open to having a meeting with the RCMP should they have interest in looking at whether, in fact, any of the instances that we have identified require additional investigation on their part.
Thank you. Can you remind us about the differences between Procurement Assistance Canada and your office?
So Procurement Assistance Canada, and I can speak very positively about this organization because this organization has a mandate to help Canadian suppliers ultimately be successful in winning government contracts. They provide training to suppliers, including things like one-on-one coaching, interpretation, assistance doing, I think, preliminary and basic research on how to identify opportunities using the systems that exist within the federal government. They also do a lot of outreach, so you'll see them at venues where small and medium businesses are participating in conferences or trade shows, again, talking about the benefits of becoming a federal supplier. And part of their raison d'etre is to expand the federal supply chain. Our mandate is to resolve issues. So we equally feel it's our responsibility to help grow the federal supply chain, and you'll see in our work that we have many times worked in tandem with Procurement Assistance Canada, because as they're encouraging those suppliers, we want those same suppliers to be aware of what has tripped other suppliers up from being successful. So they should be aware of those issues, and that's what we do in that top 10 list. And typically in presentations that I give, that's a slide that I can easily spend an hour on, breaking down, what trips up suppliers in being successful in federal procurement opportunities. And so Procurement Assistance Canada also, when we're not present, helps kind of demystify what's a real issue and what's not a real issue. And in my response to Madame Goudreau, I provided a response about simplification, and I think that has to be the guiding light as we migrate into a new world of procurement. So if we don't make processes easier to understand for all suppliers, overlaying additional policy is not the sole answer. It has to be done in tandem with simplification.
As a former banker, I hear synergy. So does it make sense to have two offices doing similar work? Is there a way that you can work more closely together or merge?
So I would suggest...
Not that I'm trying to put you out of a job here, just to be clear. I'm just, Yeah.
But I would suggest perhaps I didn't draw enough of a distinction, because our office also has to act with independence from the department as a byproduct of who we are and what we do. So we also receive complaints from suppliers. We do ADR, where we offer mediation services, and then we do these systemic reviews. And so it would not be appropriate for an entity to both encourage participation for suppliers and then review complaints lodged by those suppliers with government about the practices of government departments.
Great. How much time do I have, Chair? Okay, great. Thank you. So just moving on to something else. What lessons can the Government of Canada learn from other jurisdictions when it comes to vendor performance management systems, et cetera?
So thank you for asking the question. Vendor performance management is in my top 3 of things I'm passionate about. There are a number of jurisdictions, both domestic within Canada and also international, that we can look to. Within Canada, you only need to look as far as the city of Ottawa to see a successful vendor performance management framework. You also have a pretty robust vendor performance management framework within Infrastructure Ontario, a provincial entity that has a long-standing record where they're involved in large-scale infrastructure projects and dealing with complex issues in vendor performance, including joint ventures and consortia, where it's not just the individual score of a singular entity, but multiple entities working in tandem. And the importance of this is, which I'm sure you understand, having the ability to prevent poor performers who have historically performed poorly in federal contracts, and having that be a negative repercussion on their ability to successfully win future federal contracts, and equally so create an incentivization for good performance and ensure that that good performance also has positive implications on the likelihood of being a successful supplier in a subsequent process.
Great, thank you.
Gaudreau, please.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Your mandate is find solutions. A while ago, I have verified
Man.
you've had concrete solutions for
Not
4
this translator
years
again.
to change the situation totally. I'm trying to express my frustration. For the past 7 years, how many recommendations have been heard and applied? Because that's your job. How many? Let me be clear in my answer, because I may not have properly answered your last question now about the budget we requested for the past 4 years. The fundamental recommendations were simply prepared this year, so there's a major difference. I thought the question had to do with our budget.
I'll turn it up.
The most important issue is how many recommendations were made by our office and not implemented by the departments.
There we go.
That is why we prepare report cards in our annual report. There are many examples where recommendations were satisfied. I think that's for most recommendations. For one, it wasn't sufficiently responded to. Sometimes only half of the responses, we only get 50% in the responses that satisfy us, and that is why we prepare a report card and include that in the annual report. Now, how can we do exceptional work when we don't have the financial resources? When we realize that recommendations implemented have a direct impact on accountability and transparency. So I'm placing myself in the place of taxpayers. So thank you very much for your response.
Thank you, Madame. Ms. Jansen and then Ms. Rochefort.
So I understood you to say that under this new approach to procurement, more of the responsibility is going to shift to the supplier, that they'll be expected to be more creative in delivering the work rather than the department itself clearly outlining what the job requires. But Canadians have seen what happens when government contractors get a bit too creative. We get ballooning costs, we get missed deadlines, nobody taking responsibility when the project fails. So if departments stop setting clear expectations and start leaving it up to suppliers to figure it out, how do we avoid turning this into a dog's breakfast? Like where no one's accountable. And taxpayers are going to pay more, and Canadians are left wondering, well, who's actually running the show?
So thank you for the question. I think in a solutions-based environment, it won't allow the cost escalation because at the end of the day, the contract would have its associated value. It's the question of, was the solution a complete solution to the problem that was identified? So in a task-based environment, it's much more important for the department to be able to identify how all of these tasks would align to create an ultimate solution to whatever issue it is that they're trying to resolve as a result of these tasks. So hiring an individual with a specific skill set, they're being brought on to resolve, or address probably a known problem. And the creativity component kind of speaks to allowing the supplier to take advantage of their knowledge rather than the department being prescriptive and saying do it this way. Perhaps that methodology is dated and no longer is relevant, and that's not how it's best done by industry. And so industry is able to bring those best practices forward. That being said, I'm not trying to suggest that I see the solutions-based environment as an oasis either. And I think to answer your question, I think active contract management is what's so important. And that's why in my opening remarks, I highlighted one of the reports that we're hoping to launch in the near term is something looking directly at contract administration practices, because we do think with the emphasis on economic efficiency, we believe that there are economic inefficiencies in contract administration, and we believe that a fulsome review in this area is absolutely necessary.
Now, you also mentioned that you use the term bait and switch on purpose to finally get the attention of the departments, is my understanding. So that's kind of telling. After 7 years of warning about these problems, it's reached a boiling point. And yet, instead of fixing what's broken, we're seeing workarounds like this new procurement system, and that those workarounds are going to make it worse. So let me ask you plainly, after everything your office has uncovered, will Canadians finally see real positive change to a system that's been failing them for years? Or are we just dressing up the same old problem with new language while trust keeps slipping away?
So, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I think this goes back into my opening statement around the foundational changes necessary. So certainly the recommendations we made within this singular report are to address the previous practice of bait and switch, and also, make sure that we're keeping tabs on the unintended consequences in the new environment as we move forward. But more broadly speaking, when you mentioned that 7 years of frustration, that lies with what we see across all issues in federal procurement. And that's why last year, our annual report was entitled Time for Action, right? And we also perceive ourselves to be part of the solution. And therefore, that's why we brought to the table the foundational changes that we believe are necessary. And the next step, so one thing I did is I actually wrote to all parliamentarians and provided them a copy of our foundational changes document and requested a meeting to discuss the importance of these foundational changes. The next step is we're actually going to have what we call solutions forums, right? So we're going to have other jurisdictions who have successfully implemented these styles of foundational changes within their system and lead us through what that implementation looked like, what positive benefits they had, what negative outcomes they saw. And our hope is to bring forward federal actors as part of these solutions forums so that they're able to glean, what other jurisdictions have already experienced. And I will say plainly, the federal procurement system is in many senses not a leader in the procurement realm, right? So we can look at other jurisdictions who are doing things better within Canada and learn from them, right? And there's a multitude of reasons why that may be. but where there is someone leading in something like VPM. We are currently piloting a VPM process within PSPC. So I know the department has leaned heavily on other jurisdictions to see how they've done things, but I think that needs broader exposure. Other parts of the government also need to understand what the true benefits are in a government-wide vendor performance management framework. So I would suggest not to say we have all of the answers, but walking the walk in these 5 foundational changes I think is key. And like I said, we are seeing optimism in certain areas. So vendor performance management, we're seeing positive steps being made. In the one set of procurement rules at the highest level, whether it be by statute or regulation, we noticed that in the red tape reduction put forward by the Treasury Board, they themselves highlighted that they are looking at this. Now, again, looking at this doesn't mean making a change, right? So that's where accountability is so important. So places like this committee are where accountability can be brought to these ideas, right? And so I bring forward the solutions and hope to walk forward towards implementation, but I also hope this committee helps in the accountability aspect of these foundational changes.
Thank you. Ms. Rushworth, please.
Oh, thank you. Informative as well, and I just want to come back on one point that has left me uncomfortable, and that's when suggesting that the PSPC wanted to have a segment of the report pulled out, and because I don't read it that way in your report at all, it doesn't come across in that manner. And I was glad that you point out that best practices in audit is to go back to the participants and ask for their feedback, and obviously that's what you did, so I found that excellent, and I read it with great interest. And when it said PSPC does not support including these paragraphs in the report to be released, as the assertions made in the paragraphs are not supported by data and information contained in the documents reviewed by your office. And they say, consequently, they are of the view that these paragraphs are speculative and out of the review scope. So I think that that's a normal comment, feedback in an audit process. So I went to look, I thought, okay, so they're making that comment. So I went back into your report to try to find the evidence in support of why you felt that it was important. And so basically, the only evidence that I found was on page 27, where it said, SMEs have expressed concerns. So to me, I thought that was anecdotal. And I didn't feel that was factual, and I thought the point of view of PSPC was actually very reasonable and very well thought out. As I expressed to you, though, this is of interest to me, and I look forward to in the spring when PSPC comes forward with a program. That's not to in any way diminish the interest in
is there a question
for
here?
A small and medium-sized business to be able to access federal procurement. But I just felt that it was in support of what PSPC said, their comment. Basically, that there was not evidence in the report to include it. I guess for me, just a final comment, an unintended consequence of having it there, for me personally, if we're using the same terminology as in your report, is when I read it, it felt like the law of diminishing returns. Like, I felt your report was strong. It's like you have 1 cup of coffee in the morning, it's great. But when you have 4 or 5 like I've had, you become jittery and it's not so good. And so I felt that the additional information pertaining to SMEs and anecdotal in nature, I felt just diminished the quality of the report. So that would be my point of view. I wanted to be, to firmly indicate that I supported that position based on everything that I read.
Go have another cup of coffee.
Thank you again for your good work. That's what I want to say as well.
So there was no question.
If I may, just to respond to that. So there is a section of the report that includes an RFI response provided for by a small and medium-sized business expressing concerns. And so what I've alluded to a number of times in this committee is that other small and medium-sized suppliers have expressed that same concern to us. They didn't express that concern on the understanding that it would make its way into a report. Therefore, it would have been inappropriate for us to bring that information forward in that way, because that's not how we obtained the information. But it substantiated a concern that was highlighted. So it wasn't truly anecdotal evidence that we were porting into the report. It was true evidence that we did have. We just didn't feel it was appropriate because of the methodology by which it was received to include in the report, because that's not why or how it was presented to us. And I just want to reaffirm what we wanted to do was bring accountability and transparency to this issue. So we absolutely could have followed the view of PSPC, removed this issue from the report, but then we wouldn't be having these conversations. And that's why I think there is absolute value in having it there.
No comment quickly. There was no pressure to remove anything from any report here. This was a normal process, and you actually received and welcomed the comment in a certain sense as part of the process.
No, absolutely. I mean, we almost encourage, active discussion on the report. We think that that's what brings it value. If it's just accepted without specific consideration, that's not as telling to me that it's been understood and followed than if there is specific debate, because that means they're acutely paying attention to every section, and that to me is important.
I'm sure you would be disappointed if you heard coming out of this committee that you were asked to officially take out a section of a report, correct? That would not be a fair reflection of your statement.
Right. I would say what was done was in the context of the Procurement Ombudsman regulations, there is a required opportunity for the department to offer their views on the recommendations and the reasons thereof.
Thank you.
Right. We'll go to Mr. Gill and then back to Ms. Sutz.
With respect to the policies and procedures, are the rules clear enough for the folks who are doing the work, or are they buried in legal jargon and open to interpretation?
So that's a fair question, and I would say that even though we did assess that the contractual terms did exist, the way that they were portrayed in the contractual documents made for a little bit of a difficult interpretation, right? So some of the terms existed in solicitation, and so they had to be ported into the contract, right? And so they wouldn't be as transparent as one would hope. And so as a result, I think I can answer your question by saying it does put a high level of onus on the individual who's managing or administering the contract to be able to discern what all of their rights and obligations are flowing from the contract. Now, I will take one opportunity in liberality here to say that one thing we saw in the report, in our annual report, was the number one issue that we saw from government purchasers was a lack of training. That was their number one concern. Right. And so when you extrapolate your question and knowing that that's a concern, absolutely, did the term exist to give them certain rights to enforce under the contract? Yes. Would the average employee who is managing that project know that? Perhaps not, right? And the question is, why not? And so seeing number one being training, that tells me that there is an importance on understanding the rules, but also, again, the complexity of the rules, right? Were the rules written in plain language so that on first blush you would understand what it meant, or would it require legal interpretation? And if it's legal interpretation, then it's too complex, because you cannot write in a method that requires a legal background to understand a clause within a contract that should be available to all Canadians to bid on.
So are they getting the training necessary to understand these contracts in plain language, and how is that training going so far?
So I certainly can't answer in terms of are they receiving the requisite training. I can say that the response provided to us would indicate no. I will also say that our office takes training incredibly seriously, so we offer both to departments themselves the opportunity to have departmental meetings. And so when we have these departmental meetings, we help demystify our mandate, but also walk through what we do in these types of reviews, what we're looking for, the importance of our recommendations, and that top 10 list, to make sure that they're not making the mistakes that are often identified to our office, right? Because I think if they're not aware of these issues, then obviously they're not looking for them. And I think that that's the beauty in our work, is that we're bringing forward many of the issues that are common, right? So if it becomes common and you understand how you're to approach the issue and what outcomes look like that are successful, then all of a sudden your job becomes easier. So to answer your question, I can't speak on whether they're getting the training, but from what we're hearing, it appears like the answer would be no.
And that's sad to hear. The other question I had was, is there a hotline or reporting system for staff in the various procurement fields that you cover or review for them to blow the whistle on something that they don't smell right? And does anyone actually listen?
So depending on the nature of the concern that's being highlighted, there are a number of resources that exist for whistleblowers. But if someone is identifying something of a procurement nature, then absolutely our office is not a bad entry point into that first preliminary conversation. If it turns out to be something of an illegal nature, then obviously we would forward that concern to the RCMP. But as soon as it becomes procurement related, I would suggest we're absolutely open and available, and we have an intake team that actually answers phone calls, and we answer them promptly within 24 hours.
So over the past few years, how often have people come to you with those concerns? Have you seen an uptick or the same number or not at all?
So I just want to nuance perhaps the question where you said for whistleblowing purposes. So when I highlighted in my opening remarks, we received 670 cases. Some of those cases could include elements of, identification of potential wrongdoing, right? And I would say that is a significant uptake. So when I began in 1819, we were at approximately 300 and I think 350 cases approximately, or 330 cases approximately. Now we're at 670. So that's a pretty significant volume increase. And across all of our mandate areas, we're seeing an increased need for our services. And I think that's a good thing, right? More people know our office exists. We have 33 employees, but I would suggest most of the federal procurement landscape now knows we exist. And I would say that when I started, I don't think that's true.
How often or how, sorry.
Past our time, I'm afraid. Ms. Sutz, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Okay, thank you again for being here with us. A few questions coming to mind at this point. So one was building on the discussion about OSIC, the Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance. And question for you being, it's my understanding that they have a role as compliance specialists. So with that in mind, what is the authority that they have versus yours to take action against suppliers that could be of concern?
Right. So I don't want to speak to their mandate, but what I can do is centralize our role in terms of supplier activities. And so in terms of supplier activities, our role is relatively limited. So where we have contact with suppliers is if a supplier comes to us to lodge a complaint about a singular contract that has been issued, all of a sudden we have a direct formal interaction with that supplier, and they're providing information about what they believe was not done appropriately by the government department. Our other context is in procurement practice reviews such as this, where we're reviewing the practices of the departments, not the practices of the individual suppliers. And that's what makes bait and switch a little bit unique in the sense that it's actually a practice of the supplier that starts the issue, right? So it's the actions of that supplier that would cause the inappropriate replacement of that resource. What we also looked at in this review was, were there available mechanisms for the departments to mitigate this risk, right? And so what we found was yes. Through the contractual provisions that I kind of finished touching on in my previous answer, we did find that there were provisions, albeit embedded sometimes within the solicitation that was carried forward into the contract to give the governmental resources some of the tools to identify the problems. But we don't then look into the specific activities of the suppliers in these procurement practice reviews. And so if you wanted a better understanding of the mandate of the other office, I think you'd be better placed to ask them, because I don't want to mischaracterize what their responsibilities are.
Good to try and get my head around the difference too, right? So I appreciate that. Now, going back, you had your 5 fundamental challenges that you had shared through this work, and also acknowledging that PSPC has implemented the vendor performance management aspect, and they've started with contracts that they're administering, while also doing the work concurrently to develop the strategy of how that can be rolled out to other departments. Can you share your thoughts about that initial effort and the impact that this can have, or the direction, the strategy to roll this out to others?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the moment in time in which I answer this question is really important. So the moment in time now is one of optimism, right? In the sense that there has been progress made. The pilot project is real. It's been stood up, and there are implementation measures to take it to that next step, right? But currently, it's still not in terms of having impacts, like the total scores that are being allocated to suppliers are not having impacts on subsequent processes, right? And so when it's fully stood up and active, then it will have that positive impact of truly having, both an incentive and disincentive to both good and poor performance. I will say our office has been closely tracking this because we're anticipated to be the dispute resolution body associated with the vendor performance being put forward by the department. That being said, that's still a pilot within a singular department. So if you sit outside the department and you're procuring for parks, as an example, using your own authorities, you wouldn't be able to leverage the benefits that VPM has within PSPC. So I understand, obviously, you have to start somewhere, and PSPC is probably the best department to start. Now, the reason I kind of started in the cheeky way of saying it's a moment in time, in the sense that we've been tracking this issue for 7 years, right? And so it would be so disappointing to me if, upon the completion of my mandate, that we haven't gotten to a government-wide vendor performance management framework. And that's why I refuse to take my foot off the pedal in kind of calling for this, because we're still at that pilot stage. So while I am optimistic and we're making positive strides, it's appeared in mandate letters before, and that accountability sometimes has gone missing. And so the reason why I talk about it as much as I do is to bring that accountability forward.
Yeah, amazing, and appreciate the importance, and certainly glad to see that the work is underway now. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Gaudreau.
Monsieur le Président.
Thanks, Chair. It's really important that you're here today. We don't want to experience what we experienced here before. I came here in 2019. It started in 2020. We know we're talking about ArriveCan, GC strategies, and all that. After all this, when I go back home, people are frustrated. We will find the problems. I am shocked. I am disturbed when I hear that. I am reassured to know that you've been here for 7 years and you're working on this and you'll find money in the budget. Sometimes during elections, people say they don't care anymore because nothing is changing. And that is why I decided to seek a third term. I really am looking for some hope. I don't know what happened before 2019. I came in 2019, but I think that there are good things in the horizon. But right now, what I'm experiencing on the ground is the lack of trust. And it's because of the fear of scandals that may occur. At this time, do we have enough regulations in force to prevent other scandals before the implementation of reforms or before the agency? I will answer in English, but I think it's because the people you meet are right. They are seeing the same things year after year. It's not only 1 year, 10 years, 20 years of the same things recurring. I want to be optimistic, and that is why we are providing training on the necessary fundamental changes. This creates optimism. I think this is a very important time. If we do not make the necessary changes, the situation will be the same in 10, 20 years. But I really believe that we do have an opportunity now to make changes that will create positive outcomes for the process, not only in defense, but with all other mandates. And that is why I'm speaking with some optimism, because I know that there are people who want to resolve the issues. But we also need political support for the change to make sure that the adjustments are made. Changes are necessary, but as I stated in the report, there needs to be transparency. If the changes have negative or positive outcomes, we can change gear. It doesn't always have to be positive. There can be negative outcomes. Yes, it's okay, but that will help us find positive outcomes. Thank you. Your French is excellent, Mr. Cheklik.
Very short round with Mr. Patzer.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to kind of finish up on my last round that I had with you, because I was getting to the point around, if there's loopholes per se. Now, you finished by saying it's not just that there's one contractor who's doing it, there's multiple who are doing it, which it's kind of the point that I'm getting at. They know they can do it, and they know they can get away with it, even if it's not per se to the point of overt fraud. They obviously know they can do it and get away with it. Like recommendation 2 here, it seems like a good starting point to try to hopefully end this practice. But what recourse is there to, I guess, recoup costs, or what is being done to penalize these people to make sure that they don't do it again?
So, again, I just want to make clear that once the change was made, the policy decision by the department to update the MLUAs to reflect that we're no longer evaluating the individual resource, the risk of this occurring moving forward has changed, right? So therefore, they've effectively eliminated the risk moving forward. But in the universe before that change was taken, right, we did have a universe where this was a risk. And so this is the second report now that our office has written that's highlighted that this is happening with a high level of frequency, that 41% that you rightfully point to, has a consequence, whether it be in terms of the integrity of the procurement process or the financial repercussions to the Government of Canada for paying more for a resource that doesn't have the attributes that they're paying for. In terms of what recourses are available if the finding is negative, and there are implications, there have been instances where suppliers have been banned from participating in federal procurement, and there have been legal proceedings initiated to try to recapture some of those funds. Now, again, I'm not best positioned to tell you what the status is of those processes, but I can certainly say that those have been reported publicly, so I think you should be able to get answers to those questions.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Wonderful.
We're okay.
Great. Thanks very much, as always. You've shown once again why we consider you such a great friend of OGGO and also the purchasing department. Do you mind if I just ask you a couple quick questions to follow up? You spoke about a need for more resources. Are you able or willing to share how much more you require? You don't need to do it now, but perhaps in writing.
Sure, I could absolutely put that in writing, and I would appreciate that.
Perfect.
That opportunity.
And you spoke about works in progress that you can't get to because of lack of resources. Would you be able to detail some of the ones that you're looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can also provide. Do you want me to do that now? Or
just in writing is wonderful.
Yeah, I could do that in writing.
And just another question on the bait and switch. It was mostly around IT resources. I'm wondering if it extends to other purchases within the government. What I'm going to ask about specifically is large projects that are funded by the federal government goes to a main contractor, and we're hearing reports they are now subcontracting out to subcontractors who then fill positions with inappropriate labor, illegal labor, or unqualified labor. Have you heard of that? Would your department get into studying such an issue?
So, unfortunately, our mandate doesn't extend to subcontractors because they don't have a direct contractual relationship with the federal government. So it would be by virtue of the prime's relationship to the federal government that gives us the mandate. The subcontractor has a private legal relationship with the prime, and therefore we don't have the line of sight on the subcontractor prime issues.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. I want to thank you for pointing out the great work Procurement Assistance Canada does, the old GC buy and sell. They do a fantastic job. If there's anyone with small businesses looking right now, I highly recommend you look them up. They do a fantastic job of connecting Edmonton, Albertan, Canadian small businesses with government contracting. I'll send a bill for that endorsement, but they really do a great job, so I appreciate you bringing it up. Before we go, colleagues, I just want to mention Lindsay here, one of our analysts who was with OGGO for a long time. She's moved over to the Senate, but thank you for filling in today. Certainly one of the best analysts we've had, and a wonderful compliment to Olivier, so thank you very much for joining us. Thank you again, Kelly. Ms. Correa, thank you for being with us. Mr. Yeglick, again, thank you for everything you've done and your testimony today. Greatly appreciated. Thank you. Colleagues, if nothing else, we will be adjourned. Thanks very much, everyone.
Okay. What are we at? We're at 2 hours and 45. Holy smokes. So we will take a break. We'll take an hour and 15-minute break until question period. Carney's not going to be in question period today. Unfortunately, I mean, he is in Ottawa. He just chaired a cabinet meeting. So I don't know. He doesn't want to come to question period. I'm assuming he will be there tomorrow because it's usually his day that he shows up, is 1 day a week. But yeah, so let's take a break. We'll be back in an hour and 15. I put the link in chat already for question period. There it is again in chat. And I will see you guys shortly. Cheers, guys.